So, what if everything we think we know about farming, about controlling nature to feed ourselves, what if it's all wrong? Today, we're going to dive into this pretty radical idea called do nothing farming. We'll follow the incredible journey of one farmer who discovered what it really means to work with nature instead of fighting against it. This one idea from Japanese farmer Akinori Kimura, it just flips our whole perspective upside down, doesn't it? It suggests we aren't the heroes of the story. Maybe we're just helpers. But this wasn't some philosophy he just read in a book. It was born from a decade of absolute struggle, and it all started with a simple, yet seemingly impossible challenge. And that struggle, that challenge, was all about growing what a lot of people started calling a miracle apple. Okay, so picture this. In Japan, this one farmer, Akinori Kimura, decides he's going to do something that's, well, basically unthinkable. In an industry that is completely hooked on chemicals to get that perfect shiny fruit, he wanted to grow apples with 0 pesticides and 0 fertilizers. Absolutely none. And he had a very personal reason for it. You see, the chemicals weren't just killing pests, they were affecting him. He said the work was something to be feared, something that required covering up, and that just wasn't sustainable, not for the land, and definitely not for him. He was searching for a way to farm with a smile, not with a mask. Kimura's personal struggle really just mirrored a much bigger, much more hidden problem, the real price of what we call normal farming. So on the one hand, you see this image of modern agriculture, right? It looks so clean, so orderly, but underneath that neat surface, well, that's where the real story is. The constant use of chemicals can have this absolutely devastating effect, literally turning rich, living earth into dead, lifeless sand. And this isn't just some theory, okay? Kimura saw this happen with his own 2 eyes. A massive farm, 60 hectares, basically turned to sand in just 10 years. The very chemicals that were supposed to make it productive ended up killing the soil itself, the very foundation of all life. This is the crisis he was really fighting against. And man, his fight was just brutal. For 8 straight years, everything that could go wrong did. His trees got sick, pests just swarmed the orchard, and he made 0 income. Nothing. His family was suffering, his neighbors were calling him a fool, telling him to quit. He was pushed to the absolute brink. By that 8th year, standing there, looking at his failed orchard, he actually considered ending his own life. But right then, just as he was about to give up, an answer started to emerge. And it didn't come from some new technology, it came from a really old philosophy, from a guy who was both a farmer and a philosopher named Masanobu Fukuoka. Decades earlier, he'd written this revolutionary book, The One Straw Revolution, and it argued for a completely different way of relating to the land. And Fukuoka's whole idea was this: our constant meddling, our digging, our spraying, our weeding, that was the very thing causing all the problems we were trying to fix. He said our human wisdom was often just foolish. The answer wasn't to do more, it was to do a whole lot less. So his philosophy boils down to these 4 principles that, let's be honest, go against pretty much everything in modern farming. No tilling the soil, no chemical fertilizers, no pesticides or herbicides. And get this, no weeding. To most farmers, that sounds like a recipe for total disaster. But Fukuoka said, no, this is the only way to let nature's own perfect systems do the work for you. Okay, but here's the thing. Kimura had basically tried this, right? He'd stopped using all the chemicals for 8 years, and it was a miserable failure. He had taken away all the bad stuff, but his orchard was still dying. The do-nothing philosophy clearly wasn't the whole story. He was missing a huge piece of the puzzle, and the answer wasn't on his farm. And the answer, it turns out, wasn't in a book or some lab. He found it deep in the wild mountains. At his absolute lowest point, Kimura climbed a mountain called Mount Iwaki. And there, deep in the wilderness, he found a wild nut tree. It was perfectly healthy, just covered in fruit. And of course, no one was out there spraying it or fertilizing it. It was just thriving. And in that one moment, it all clicked. He finally understood. The secret wasn't just to subtract from nature, it was to add to it. His big mistake was trying to create this clean, sterile environment for just his apple trees. That wild tree wasn't alone. It was part of this messy, complex, incredibly diverse ecosystem. That whole system was what kept it healthy. He didn't need a clean orchard. He needed to build a forest
in his orchard.
And this was a complete 180 in his thinking. Instead of waging war on pests, the new goal was to create a habitat for their predators. Instead of ripping out all the weeds, you use them to make the soil healthier. Instead of adding nutrients yourself, you foster the tiny microorganisms that create them naturally. And there's a real science to this. Ecologists have a word for it: biodiversity. As the ecologist Shuichi Sugiyama explains, this incredible variety of life, everything from insects to microbes to plants, is what creates a stable, self-regulating system. The more complex that web of life is, the more stable and resilient the whole thing becomes. So, armed with this totally new understanding, Kimura went back to his farm and he just started adding life. He sowed different grasses, he welcomed insects, and in the 9th year, after almost a decade of struggle, it finally happened. His trees exploded in blossoms. He hadn't conquered nature, he had just created the conditions for nature to do its thing. And Kimura's success, you see, it wasn't just about apples. It was a proof of concept. It was a way of thinking that is now inspiring people all over the world. In fact, even before Kimura's apples bloomed, Fukuoka's farm was already this destination for young people from all over who were looking for a different way to live. They got it. They saw this wasn't just about farming, it was a whole philosophy for life. And that movement is really growing. Today, some of Japan's official agricultural co-ops, the very groups built on selling farmers' chemicals, are now actually sponsoring schools to teach Kimura's natural methods. People are using this philosophy to bring abandoned, dead farmland back to life. So this brings us right back to the core idea, that fundamental shift. It's the difference between seeing ourselves as the masters of nature, forcing it to produce for us, and seeing ourselves as a partner, a caretaker, who just humbly sets the stage and then steps back to let nature's brilliance do the rest. Which leaves us with this final question to think about. This whole do-nothing approach, it suggests that maybe, just maybe, our role isn't to be the hero who tames the wild. Maybe our role is to be the quiet observer who finally understands that the real magic, the real hard work, was being done by the apple tree all along.